Okay, well, 11 years ago I did a video on this game, which I called Friedrich, but I've since been told it should be pronounced Friedrich. Okay, I can live with that. And of course, in North America, we anglicize everything, so he's Friedrich the Great to people on this side of the pond. Now, the edition that I reviewed at the time was the second edition, although nearly all editions have been identical except for cover artwork and minor changes, but it doesn't really change the game. I got rid of the game many years ago, not because I didn't like it. I actually liked it. I got it in a trade or something. This fellow wanted it. I think I wanted the game he had. I don't remember how I got rid of it. The reason I got rid of it was I was not playing it enough because it's really meant for 3 or 4 players. And here in Ottawa, don't get together too often with multiplayer play. So that's why I got rid of it. But I always regretted it, to tell you the truth. So this is what they're calling the 300th anniversary edition, the 300th anniversary of the birth of Friedrich the Great. And you can see that here on the box, Friedrich 300th, born January 24th, 1712. And this is by Rio Grande Games. I think the version I had before was by Histo Games, although they are still the original publisher. Now the third edition is virtually identical to the other two, so you don't need to buy a new edition of Friedrich in case you're worried about the game having great changes. It does not. So I'm going to go over some of the things I got wrong in the original video, and I'll actually pull that video. It's out of date now. And we'll look at the board and the pieces and why I like this fascinating game. And it's an oddity in my collection. It's about the only Euro game I have. I'm not a great Euro game fan, but this one is so different. I just really like it. So let's take a look at this fascinating game. You get 4 decks of cards in this game, and one change they did, which I totally agree with, is they've changed the colors of the backs of the cards. Now the 4 decks are identical. They're very colorful cards. But I remember the original, the backs were kind of all blue and white, and they were very hard to tell apart. This one still has the beautiful cards that the original did. Lots of neat little icons and paintings. It's a standard deck of cards going to 13. So the jacks, queens, and kings are missing. And you have these great reserve cards, which are very handy. So that's the only change. If you have the original edition, you're just fine. You really don't need to get the 300th anniversary edition if you have it already. That's one change. Okay, there hasn't been any changes that I can see in the log sheets. They're just the way I remember them from years ago. You can cut them out so each person has their own individual card. So there's 4 log sheets per sheet. Now on Board Game Geek, some enterprising fellows have redesigned some of the sheets and made them fully 8 by 10 if you thought they were too small. Again, you can download those for free. Just a slightly different arrangement. And another fellow did some nice ones. I kind of like these because they're in color. He's put 2 per page, and that's probably the ones I'm going to fool around with today. Information is still the same. You fill out the log sheets to note the size of your armies. It's just kind of nice having them in color. The edition I got had a bunch of spare cards, actually quite a lot of them. And once I sorted them and read the little errata sheet with it, it wasn't really errata. They're just explaining that there were double sets of the German cards and also double sets of the English cards. And they were warning me not to use a certain set. I guess there were some spelling mistakes or something. Anyway, this is the Fate deck, 18 cards. They are in English totally now. I don't remember if the edition I had English cards. I know there was a translation, but I don't remember if the cards themselves were in English. Now the turn track is pretty well the way I remember it. I remember it was in German, and these are in German, and you took these little wee markers, put them on the 5 boxes, because the first 5 turns of the game are different. Turn 6, things change. So as you do each turn, you remove one of these little markers. That isn't different. The translation in English is on another sheet. Not critical to playing the game, it's just giving you historical information on what happened in those particular months. Now the game covers, we know the year 1756, so it's 1756 of the 7 Years' War. Now the map is, I don't see any changes. It's exactly the way I remember it. It's mounted, it's very well done, beautiful. Everything is clearly marked, and I'll zoom in a little bit closer so we can take a look at the pieces and what the map looks like up close. Okay, we're taking a look at the army counters now. That's the Swedish army. All of the counters are wood, and you attach these little wee decals on them to identify them. So they're circular counters. They have a little bit of height to them. And I think that's the army under, if I'm saying it right, Ehrensvad. And that's a supply unit. Going over to the light blue units, that's under Ferdinand. That's the Hanoverian units. They get 2 armies. Another one there under the Duke of Cumberland, and a supply wagon or supply depot. You've got the armies of the Madame de Pompadour in red, Soubise and Richelieu, Chevert, again with the supply depots. You've got the Empire forces under Hildenburghausen, they're yellow, 1 army. And of course you've got Friedrich the Great here with Winterfeld and a couple of armies. And I've lost the spot where they set up. I should point out one of the things I like about the setup in this game is the setup numbers are very inobtrusive. You can see in very small print is 1 and 2. That means you put armies 1 and 2. So once you get playing the game, those distracting setup hexes that exist in some games are gone. Friedrich starts with a bunch of armies, of course. They're scattered all over Prussia. And you've got the Austrian armies in white down here, several of them, again with their attendant supply depots. There's a Russia in dark green. I like the colors they've chosen for them. There's an army under Apraxin, and 2 armies under Saltykov and Fermor. And you've got a Frederick the Great army under Lewald up here in East Prussia. The important features of the map are, of course, the towns and points. The small lines are roads. The thick lines are major roads, where you can move a little bit further if you utilize your entire turn on the road. The objective hexes for each country are these little flags, in this case gray for Austria, and so the color of the flag denotes the side for which they would get victory points to achieve victory. So Pompadour would need to get these red flags to achieve her victory conditions. Now Prussia, of course, is against all these powers. It is a 4-player game, but the 4 players do not cooperate together. They're not allowed to talk to each other, not allowed to see each other's forces or trade forces, anything like that. It's 4 individual players. For Prussia to win, he more or less has to not get defeated, make sure that the other 4 players don't win. And that's why it's a gem of a game as a multiplayer game. I have tried it 2-player, much more difficult. It wasn't really designed that way, but I like the game so much, I wanted to own it, and own it whether it's 2-player or 4-player, I didn't care. I just liked the game. Now, one oddity you might have noticed if you're a war gamer, no matter where you look on the map, you don't see any rivers, you don't see mountain ranges, you don't see forests. There is no terrain on this map. For all intents and purposes, it's a political map of Europe at the time. And it's so grand strategy that terrain just doesn't come into play. Armies are moving and fighting for political objectives, and that's what the game is all about. Achieving political objectives in the game, by military means, of course. Battle is only a means to an end. If you can win a battle and take a place, that's great. But you don't get into this game for just battles. Because battles in this era were kind of even. Occasionally you got some great victories. But armies were expensive to maintain. And battle was not the objective of most campaigns. It was usually territory. Well, having said that terrain doesn't matter in this game, how does combat work? And that's where I really like the game. And the combat is like no other combat system I've ever seen in any game. You might have noticed on the map these card suits. Diamonds here, spades there, clubs here, hearts here. And the map is divided into these large square sectors where the suit is prominent. They all affect combat. How absurd, you say. And I'd be the first to agree with you till I tried it. I said, what the devil does card-playing decks and suits have to do with combat in the age of reason? And the short answer is, it doesn't really have anything to do with it. So why do I like this game? Why is this a good game? Well, the combat system is incidental to what you're trying to do in the game, which is achieve political, geographical methods. But in the end result, the combat, the end result is fairly historical. Trying to describe combat in this game is not going to be easy, but I'll try. Now, before I do that, I'll explain something about the rules. Okay, the rules booklet is only about 7 pages long. It does have illustrations, and it's an easy game to learn. There's no question about that. It's not a complex game. They're very good examples of how movement is done, how supply works, and how combat works. And the combat system is pretty darn neat. The funny thing is that there's no illustrations of it in the booklet because combat is really a mini card game in itself. And I'll try to explain the combat as best I can, but you almost have to play it to really understand how it works. But I'll try to give you an example of a simple combat, and well, you'll either get it or you won't. I know when I first saw it, I sort of went, what the devil is this? I mean, this is a card game, but it's so fascinating. I was just enamored with the system. Let's take a look at this example. Now, for you veteran players out there, you might be saying, what about the supply lines and the control markers and all that? I'm just trying to show combat in this case, lest we make the game too confusing. So let's say it's the Prussian turn. Under Schwerin, he decides to move, and he decides to attack Dawn. So he goes up 1, 2, armies can move 3, by the way, and he's adjacent to Dawn, so combat does occur. In fact, it's compulsory. I got this wrong 11 years ago in my video. I thought combat was on the same square. It is not. Combat is compulsory, adjacent. Thing that takes getting used to, especially for an old war gamer like me, is the fact that there is no dice in this game. The game is not decided by dice. It's decided by the cards. All right, so first of all, we check the strengths of the armies involved. And we'll go to our sheets here, and we find out that General Dahn's force has a strength of 6, and Schwerin's force has a strength of 5. So the Prussians begin with -1 against them. And I use this little dice just to remind me what the negative and the positive is. So white will be Austrian. So the Prussians start with -1. All right, so they have to open the ball, and they decide to open the ball with this 5 diamonds card. Diamonds because they're in the diamond suit, so the card they play must be diamonds. So 5 minus 1 is 4. The Prussians are really up 4 right now. So Dahn has to counter with a card, this time in the heart suit. Luckily he has one. He counters with a 6 of hearts, which now means the Prussians are back down to -2. Now, the Schwerin still has to play diamonds. Doesn't have too many left. So he's got a 4 of diamonds, which cancels out the 2 and gives him +2. It's now in the Prussians' favor. Now Dahn decides to shut this guy out. That's it. He's going to try to shut this down. He's in the hearts suit and he plays a strong card, a 10. -2. The Prussians are down -8. So it doesn't look very good. Looks like they're going to lose the game. But fortunately for them, unfortunately for the Austrians, they have this, one of the most powerful cards in the game, the reserve card. With the reserve card, you can pick any suit you want. Of course, he must pick diamonds. And the value is a 10. He'll pick the highest value there is. So he's now up 2 +2. And it's now the Austrians' turn. And unfortunately for him, the only card he has left is a 6, and it happens to be a clubs. So the Prussians win the battle by +2. When you win a battle, the enemy player must lose a number of armies or strength points, as I would call them, equal to the number that was lost by. So Dahn's army is now 4 because he's lost 2. And when you lose a battle, you must retreat a number of spaces equal to the loss. So Dahn lost 2. Dahn must retreat 2 spaces. And it's the enemy player, Schwerin, who determines his retreat route. So the most logical thing is just down here. He'll go 1, 2. Now there's certain retreat rules. You can't retreat, 1 and then forward, do weird stuff. You got to go straight back 2. You have to end up further than from when you started. So that's generally how combat works. And it's bizarre, but in the end, it kind of shows the way Age of Reason combat is like. Both armies lose forces, and one guy retreats. Now, that's a simplified form of combat, but that is how combat works. One thing an army can do as it advances is it converts squares. So let's say Schwerin is moving here, and he moves to Kolskian. He can put a control marker there because he's passed over it. He moves to Srem, puts a marker on that, and he moves to this spot called Sroda, and he puts a control marker on that. That's how you control territory. And you can do that as long as you pass over the square. The only time you cannot do that is when an enemy force is within 3 of the square. Let's say Dahn was there. So he would not be able to put one here, and he would not be able to put one here. He could move there, but he couldn't put down a control marker. Now, in that weird battle we had, let's say the control marker situation had been like that. He had moved, and Schwerin had won the battle. When Dahn retreats and moves beyond the retreat range, or the occupation range, you can retroactively put a marker, because you've passed through it already, and dawn is beyond. So you've got these neat little mechanics for capturing territory and taking them back too. This is a Euro game. Supply is taken into account, which I like. And forces in your home country, in this case Prussia. Prussia is blue. If you're in your home country, you're always supplied. But if you're out of your home country, you can only be 6 spaces away from a supply depot. So if we had a supply depot, let's say here, for the Prussians, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, let's say he's here. He could actually be as far as there and still be in supply. Now, when you're out of supply, you're flipped face down to remind you that, hey, you're out of supply. And if you do not get back in supply by the end of your turn, your army is destroyed. So supply is very, very important. We've got these neat little question markers too. Let's say we had Keith here moving and he wanted to go and control this area. Remember, he can't control areas within 3. So he can't put one at where's the Xena because Dawn is there. But he can put one of these little wee question markers. Later on, if there's a battle and he does defeat Dawn and Dawn has to go back, he's allowed to turn this question mark thing to a full control. If he does not win the battle, then that question marker must come off. So you've got this little tug of war of occupying territory. And it's a game rule, but somehow I like it. It just shows that maneuver is more important than combat. Now, I didn't say too much about the Fate deck here. Like I mentioned, it's a bunch of cards with events, and they only come into play on turn 6. And there's some advanced rules for them too about occupation and the use of them. Right now, I'm just fooling around with the basic game. But after turn 5, on turn 6, once a turn you'll be flipping these cards, reading the text, and applying whatever it says on the text. The most critical card in the game is this one, I think it's called Catherine. Or Elizabeth? No, Elizabeth, right. Death of the Tsarina. That knocks Russia out of the war, and there's various political repercussions. It can also end the game too, so this is kind of neat in that you don't know when the game is going to end, so you want to be trying to win at all times. Well, in closing, I must say that this game is very popular in Europe. Not so much in North America. But in Europe, Friedrich figures in a lot of their conventions. They have a national convention in Europe too, like we do at WBC in Pennsylvania, the World Board Gaming Championships, where, as far as I know, Friedrich has never been a feature. It's never been part of the canon of games played there. Anyway, like I said, it's very popular in Europe, and it's an award-winning game. It's gone through multiple printings, and it certainly doesn't matter whether I like it or not. It's a popular game, but I do like it, and it's the only Euro game I have in my collection. So the fact that I have it in my collection tells me something, that obviously I like it. Is it the definitive word, the last word, and Friedrich the Great games? No, by no means. It's entirely different than GMT's Prussia's Glory. It's entirely different than Avalon Hill's Friedrich the Great game. And it is not the last word in Friedrich the Great games, but it is one hell of a game. And if you can play it 4 players, I'm sure you'll have a good time. So that's it for this review of another Friedrich the Great game, and thank you for watching.